Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to talk about springs. In particular, some things that you need to know about springs in order to better understand your car's setup and make you go faster. And what we're talking about today is spring rate versus spring load. Talking about coil springs like this Landrum coil spring. This has a rate of 250 pounds and is a 12-inch spring. This spring, along with all other springs, are going to follow Hooke's law. So Hooke's law is force equals Kx. The F is force, basically the load applied to the spring or the load produced by the spring. K is your spring constant, and then X is the amount of travel, the displacement on the spring. We can use this equation to talk about the difference between load and rate, because F, the force, is your load, while K, the spring constant, is your rate. If we go down here to our rate versus load kind of equation differences, we can see the relationship between rate and load in these two equations. Rate is the load divided by the deflection. If we take a spring like this and we compress it 2 inches, we want to find the rate, and the spring produces 500 pounds of load at that 2 inches of deflection. What we can do is take that load, which is 500, divide by the deflection, which is 2, and we get a rate of 250. Using that same equation, we can instead solve for load, where we get load equals rate times deflection. We know this is a 250 pound spring. We want to know how much load it's going to produce at 2 inches of deflection. So we take 250 times 2, you get 500 pounds of load. So using the spring tester, we can talk about rate and load and see the differences kind of play out. Remember, we're going to use Hooke's law, which is F equals Kx, to reference the numbers that we get here. So I have our Landrum 250 pound 12-inch spring in the machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to compress it 2 inches in the machine. That is our X. So our X is 2 inches. And then we'll check our load, which is F. Now, because this is a 250 pound spring, that's our K, we can assume that F equals Kx, 250 times 2, we should have 500 pounds of load at 2 inches of compression. 2 inches of compression, 500 pounds on the money. F equals 500 pounds, K is 250, and X is 2. Our load is 500, our rate is 250, and our displacement is 2 inches. So what I can do now is I can actually check the rate real easy. So I can do that by zeroing out my scale here, and I'll go an additional 1 inch, and we should get 250 pounds. Again, we've zeroed both our displacement scale and our load scale. So what we're doing is we're checking the rate here in the middle of the travel. 244. So here in the middle of the travel, we're seeing 244 pounds right in the middle of the travel. The cool thing about Landrum Springs is they'll give you a rate sheet that shows your rate at each point throughout the travel, and that's really handy so you don't have to go and test your springs like this. Now, if I zero out the scales again and I let the compression go, what we'll see is my scale will go backwards, so I'll see the total amount of compression that I have in the spring right now, and then I should see the total amount of load going backwards. And I get 3.075 and 763 pounds of load. So that's my load. This is my displacement. We can use Hooke's law again. So 767 would equal 250 times 3.09. We can check that math. It should line up certainly within the margin of error of the spring tester. So that's how we can use Hooke's law to understand the difference between rate and load. Remember, we still have these equations too that we can use to reference to understand the difference between rate and load, and the relationship between rate and load. Understanding rate and load is really important, especially when you go to set your load numbers, right? So if you want to set your load to 2,200 pounds at 14 inches and you want to calculate your spring rate that you need to do that, you can take the amount of deflection you have, your total load, and you can divide it out and get a spring rate that you want. This gets a little more complex when you get to bump springs and bump stops and things like that, but the basics are still there. F equals KX. Force equals spring constant times displacement. Thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. Please drop any questions you have in the comments. We'd be happy to do either more videos or answer them in the comments, and we'll see you on the next one. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.